Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, kindly be seated. The meeting will soon begin. Please set your mobile phones to silent so we do not have any disturbances. Thank you. This will take about 40 seconds. Yeah, no. So not yet. Right? Everybody sees it's not. I can remind people. Yeah, soon, but 3 minutes. So is that it? Stay waiting in the room for some time. When do you want to? Yeah. What was the good morning? And then what is it after that? Oh, no, not yet. This is the start. Right. But then this should happen. Yeah, so you need to wait. Okay. Some time. Yeah. How are we doing for time? Okay, we are delayed slightly. No. But it's okay because it's all ready, right? No, not ready. In the room. Who is missing? Yeah, it's just whenever we are ready, we can call the pin, right? 1 minute. Yeah. You can just announce the conference. Okay, but then when somebody, when do I start? Yes, somebody, you can start even when you're walking. When you come in, you can announce the name. Yeah, no, that should be here. Yeah. About 10 seconds. Yes, as long as somebody. When do I do that? Once people tell you they're ready to come in. As long as somebody waves. Yeah. Who is waving you, do you know? Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The meeting will begin very shortly. Please be seated.
Give me a Skype ID. Banana.
Did you start from New York?
No, I come from no, I came from Malaysia yesterday.
Oh, okay.
I go.
Could you kindly take your seats? We are very soon to begin. So you wave. You wave. I'm here. Okay, as long as... Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the opening of the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on the Beijing+25 review. We are honored to have representatives from member states, civil society organizations, as well as partners and colleagues from the United Nations system. Please join me in welcoming United Nations Under Secretary General and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Ms. Armida Alisjabana. Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, Ms. Anita Bhatia. United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Causes and Consequences, Ms. Dubravka Simonovic. And Vika Krisilia Larasati, the representative from civil society. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, here is our opening video. This reflects on the journey over the last 25 years.
Beijing, 1995.
In 1995, the world gathered in Beijing to take bold action for women and girls' rights. These voices unified into the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. Almost 25 years later, ESCAP, UN Women, and our partners in Asia and the Pacific are taking a closer look at where we stand on these commitments. While we've made considerable progress, the pace of change has been slow and uneven. We must do more. 2020 will mark the 25th anniversary of Beijing, the 20th anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, and the first 5 years of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It's an ideal time to assess the progress that's already been made and re-energize our commitment to go further. Much has improved in the last 25 years. For the generation inheriting the outcomes of the Beijing platform, this progress has been life-changing.
In my mom's generations, women my age were expected to stay home. But now I have the opportunity to pursue my career.
My mother had to study what society expected, but increasingly, women of my generation can study what we want.
I have the opportunity to run 2 businesses on my own, which my mom didn't have the society acceptance to do.
In my mother's generation, men were considered more worthy of education and inheritance, but today, being a daughter, you're worthy of all these opportunities too.
Despite some progress, young women know gender equality has still not been achieved.
Women are still not taken as seriously as men in the workplace.
More effort should be made in breaking gender stereotypes.
One of the key challenges is low level of women's representation in politics and in decision making.
More women than ever before are achieving improved educational outcomes, but these achievements and Asia-Pacific's dynamic economic growth are not translating into more and better jobs. Despite more than doubling the proportion of women in Parliament since 1995, female representation still stands at only 20% across the region. In 2018, 1 in 2 women has experienced physical and/or sexual violence from an intimate partner in the last 12 months. Challenges remain to achieving sexual and reproductive health and rights, especially for women from marginalized groups. Women and girls are particularly vulnerable to climate-related changes and disasters, as many are food insecure and reliant on natural resources for their livelihoods. At this Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference, we will focus on identifying strategies to advance women's and girls' rights in 6 priority areas: economic empowerment, social protection and universal health services, freedom from violence, stigma and stereotypes, participation and decision-making, peaceful and inclusive societies, climate action and resilience building. It's time to come together to plan how to make gender equality a reality for women and men and girls and boys everywhere.
Together we can prosper.
Together, we can end violence, stigma, and stereotypes.
Together, we can influence our future.
Together, we can save the planet.
Generation equality,
Realizing women's rights for an equal future.
Ladies and gentlemen, following that inspiring and thought-provoking footage, it is now my privilege to invite Ms. Armida Alice-Jabana, United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, to deliver her opening statement.
Honorable Vice President of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Honorable Ministers, Ms. Anita Bhatia, Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, Ms. Dubravka Shimonovic, United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Vika Krisilia Larasati, Civil Society Organization Representative, distinguished delegates, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on the Beijing+25 review, organized by ESCAP in collaboration with UN Women and members of the UN family. 25 years on from the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, I'm delighted to see so many distinguished delegates. There is a strong sense of commitment to gender equality and the empowerment of women in the room. I hope we can transform this energy into an ambitious ministerial declaration in the coming days. The gender gap in primary education has been closed. Maternal mortality in the region has been halved. In the opening video, we have heard from young women about the opportunities on offer to them, which many in their mother's generation could not have been imagined. Opportunities for education and greater freedom over their lives. There is much progress to celebrate on the 40th anniversary on the adoption of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. 25 years on, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action continues to guide our work. This review process has brought to light many progressive measures underway in our region. I'm thinking of the adoption of legislation to guarantee women's equal inheritance rights and end domestic violence, or strategies to boost girls' access to education at all levels, including in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The numerous measures taken by member states to promote women's economic participation through gender-responsive labor market policies, address workplace discrimination, and support entrepreneurship are impressive. At ESCAP, we have collaborated with financial institutions and the private sector to support women's access to finance and ICT. We want to create an enabling environment which empowers women to unleash their creative energy and fulfill their business aspirations. Encouraging women's leadership is another priority. Today, we will launch a new publication on pathways to influence and women's transformative leadership, written in collaboration with UN partners. We need more transformative female leaders in our region. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development depends on it. Despite remarkable achievements, there is no doubt that equality remains out of reach for far too many women and girls. As we chart our common journey, let us build on the wealth of experience, knowledge, and good practices from our region and act where gaps are still wide. You have identified several priority areas for action. I would like to highlight just 3 of them. First, let us eliminate violence against women and girls. Even where countries have adopted progressive legislation and policies to prevent violence, there is strong evidence it continues unabated in our region. While continuing to strengthen regulatory and policy frameworks, the focus must now be on effective implementation. Implementation which hinges challenging underlying negative gender norms, stigmas, and stereotypes which perpetuate violence and discrimination. The United Nations is already strongly supporting action to break this cycle. We are committed to working with you to develop the multi-sectoral responses to eliminate violence against women and girls, definitely. Second, let us significantly increase the political participation of women. Despite more than doubling the proportion of women in parliament since 1995, the female parliamentary participation rate stands at a mere 18% across the region. In other words, a mere 2% annual rate of growth in the last 25 years. There is clear case for strengthening the meaningful participation of women throughout all decision-making realms. How else can we be sure the needs and perspectives of women are reflected in the decisions that govern our lives? Third, let us redouble our efforts to economically empower women. While the Asia-Pacific region has experienced strong economic growth, women's labor force participation rate remains significantly lower than men's. Women are clustered in vulnerable informal employment and undertake 3 times more unpaid work than men. When guaranteed equal opportunity, choice, and access to resources, women's full participation will multiply the capacity of the whole of society. Women's economic participation creates strong, positive effects in households, communities, and economies. A whole-of-government approach is needed to ensure gender equality is central to national policy agenda and actions. Gender-responsive planning and budgeting have played a critical role to play. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations is wholly committed to supporting your efforts to realize women's rights for an equal future, working closely with civil society and other partners to whom we are grateful for actively participating in the national review process. Over the next 3 days, leaders from the region will share experiences and good practices across different thematic clusters to accelerate progress on the Beijing platform for action. Guided by your wisdom and by your vision, I hope we can adopt a meaningful declaration that will serve as the regional framework for action to close gender gaps and achieve SDGs. A declaration that will bring a uniquely Asia and Pacific voice to the global level and resonate for generations to come. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary. Distinguished delegates, I presently have the pleasure of inviting the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, Ms. Anita Bhatia, to deliver her remarks. Ms. Bhatia, the floor is yours.
Ms. Armida Salcia Alice Jabana, Executive Secretary of ESCAP and UN Under-Secretary General, Ms. Dubravka Simonovic, UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Vika Chrysilla Larasati, Civil Society Representative, Honorable Ministers, distinguished delegates, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. On behalf of the Executive Director of UN Women and UN Under-Secretary General, Madam Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, I would like to start first and foremost by extending my deepest appreciation to all the governments represented here for the support that you have all provided in the 25-year review on the implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. I also want to express my continued gratitude for the invaluable partnership between UN Women and ESCAP under the able stewardship of Madam Armida Alice Jabana, the Executive Secretary for ESCAP and the UN Under-Secretary General, particularly on this review. I also want to acknowledge the vital role that our civil society partners and young people have played in informing the national and regional review processes. Through these concerted efforts, including the support provided in country by the UN and by UN Women in particular, this regional review, I'm happy to say, has benefited and is benefiting from a record submission of 41 national review reports, which is nearly double the number of reports that were received for the review in 2014. This is very good news, and I think it deserves a round of applause. What we take from this is that this represents an expression of the importance attached to the global gender equality agenda by governments within the region, both as a matter of principle for achieving the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, and because it represents a priority for the national development agendas of all of the countries represented here. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as you are aware, today's conference, represents one of 5 regional intergovernmental meetings that are taking place across the different regions. The first of these was held in Geneva in October, followed by the Africa Conference earlier this month in Addis, where I also had the pleasure of leading the UN Women delegation. This week, starting tomorrow actually, will be the regional conference taking place for the Arab states in Amman, and the last conference will be held in January in Chile, in Santiago in Chile. So these regional reviews that we are all participating in today are opportunities for governments to present specific findings from their national reviews, to assess regional trends, and to ensure that your regional concerns are prioritized and inform the global process. And then in March, at the 64th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, we will consider the collective outcomes of all of the regional meetings in the global review, and the political declaration will be appointed. So this is, as you can see, a fundamentally important process, and it is taking place at a time when we have both good news and not such good news on the global gender equality agenda. So since the 2015 review, it is good and heartening to note that states have introduced and reformed laws, policies, and programs to advance gender equality. So just to give you a snapshot of the global picture, what has happened? Countries have steadily continued to improve discriminatory and remove discriminatory laws, with 274 reforms in 131 countries towards gender equality between 2008 and 2017. The good news is more girls are in school than ever before, and more countries have reached gender parity in educational enrollment. There is also good news on global maternal mortality, where ratios have fallen from 342 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births to 211 per 100,000 in 2017. So there is good news in the world. We also know that despite all these gains, the overall picture of progress is far from what states had committed to in 1995. Women still bear disproportionately the responsibility for unpaid care and domestic work all over the world, spending as much as 3 times as much as men do in unpaid care and domestic work as men, with little sign of care work being reallocated to men. In Asia Pacific, in countries with the largest relative gaps, women spend 11 times more time than men spend on unpaid care and domestic work. On women's representation in parliaments, globally, women are only 25% or less than, occupy only 25% of seats in the single or lower houses of parliament. And in Asia and Pacific, the average proportion of seats held by women in national parliaments is even lower. I'm sure we will hear from our special rapporteur on the state of the world when it comes to violence against women. So let me not belabor that point, but just say that we know that globally, violence against girls and women remains pervasive, and we know that in Asia Pacific, the levels of intimate partner violence remain high. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, excellencies, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, with its bold vision of systemic change and the transformative power of gender equality, has fundamental relevance today when we think about what the global picture and what global data is telling us. We see this legacy so very clearly reflected in the overarching vision of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which is to achieve transformational change for all people everywhere. We know that this region has made very important strides in many of the key areas, including in expanding access to education, health services, and maternal mortality. We know that now, more than ever, both regionally and globally, we need to be united in taking urgent action to address the multiple and systemic crises, economic, environmental, social, and political, that are impacting our people, communities, and our planet, and are driving the most marginalized groups of women and girls further behind. This is a shared responsibility for all of us, and there is still a lot of work to be done through partnerships that cut across society and that will be integral to our success tomorrow. To serve as a catalyst for this drive for much needed and increased partnerships, I'm proud to say that UN Women has launched a global campaign called Generation Equality. You would have seen the posters outside, and you must be asking yourself, what is this Generation Equality? It is a campaign to focus the world's attention on realizing women's rights for an equal future. We are convening a forum which will take place next year in Mexico in May and in France in July, leveraging the key anniversaries that are taking place next year. 2020 is an exceptional year. It has lots and lots of anniversaries. It's the 20th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325. It's the 5-year anniversary of the SDGs. It is the 75th anniversary of the UN, and last but not least, it is the 10th anniversary of UN Women. So we have a big birthday coming up next year, and to celebrate the birthday, we are convening a global gathering of multiple stakeholders with the aim of galvanizing stakeholders towards urgent action and accountability. We will launch a set of action coalitions that will represent innovative models of multi-stakeholder partnerships with common goals to accelerate action. We will host satellite events so that those of you who cannot be in Mexico and Paris can join remotely. And I want to take the occasion of this morning's opening to invite all member states to consider this carbon neutral opportunity to have events in your own countries together with civil society. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it has been a great pleasure to be able to address you here today. I wish you very fruitful discussions over the next 3 days, and I invite you to join with all of us in celebrating the gains to date and to focus our attention on the work still ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bhatia. Delegates of distinction, it is now my pleasure to invite United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences, Ms. Dubravka Simonovic.
Your Excellencies, Madam Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Deputy Director of UN Women, distinguished ministers, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of non-governmental organizations. It is an honor to address you today at the opening of Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on the Beijing+25 review as the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences. Let me begin by saying that this mandate is this year celebrating its 25th anniversary. It was established 1 year before the Beijing conference as the first UN independent expert mechanism created to recommend measures on elimination of violence against women, including its causes and consequences. Over the last 25 years, through the work of my predecessors, this mandate has served as a catalyst for elaborating recommendations on preventing and combating violence against women and girls from human rights perspective, upholding the understanding that violence against women is a human rights violation. Mandate has elaborated many thematic and country visit reports with focus on obligations of states, including due diligence obligation to prevent violence against women, to provide services to victims, to prosecute perpetrators, and to organize coordinated mechanisms to address all those issues under the UN human rights framework established by the UN Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, UN CEDAW Convention, and it was already mentioned that this year the UN CEDAW Convention is celebrating its 40th anniversary. And many countries from this region are reporting to CEDAW and using reporting process as a tool to advance progress at the national level. My mandate is another type of mandate that is focusing on violence against women, and it's also working jointly with CEDAW Committee on issues related to elimination of discrimination and violence against women. So at the Beijing conference, and I had the pleasure to participate at the Beijing conference, much younger at the time, we are now seeing a lot of progress around the world, but we are seeing that violence against women is widespread, persistent. Violence is without any borders, present in all countries, and it's really a challenge and obstacle for achieving gender equality and empowerment of women. During the Beijing conference, violence against women was established as one of 12 areas of concern for priority action. And in Beijing Platform for Action, there is a clear reference to this mandate of a Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and call for states to support the mandate and cooperate with the mandate and to strengthen the mandate. In June this year, I have presented my thematic report to United Nations Human Rights Council with analysis of 25 years of this mandate, the current challenges it faces, and I have put recommendations for the way forward. This report also presents mandate's contribution to the Beijing+25 review process and includes a number of recommendations related to violence against women. It calls for further strengthening of the mandate and also for UN system-wide approach to elimination of violence against women, as well as for institutionalization of a platform of independent women's human rights mechanisms like my mandate. We also have other mechanisms like CEDAW Committee, UN Working Group on Discriminatory Laws, and then we have regional mechanisms that are dealing with violence against women, MESECVI, GRAVIO, Special Rapporteurs on African Human Rights Commission dealing with Maputo Protocol and Inter-American System also. So now we are all coming together and we are trying to produce joint statements on specific issues of a joint concern. From this region, there is the ASEAN Commission on Violence Against Women, but there is no comparable regional legally binding convention on violence against women, and there is no comparable independent expert monitoring mechanism. Operate with my mandate and CEDAW Committee, but it would be also important to consider and examine a need for maybe regional convention or more regional conventions and to conduct feasibility study to examine possibility for such instrument and to see how to accelerate progress in this area. In terms of standard setting in area of violence against women, and with respect to long-term debate at UN level on adequacy of international human rights framework on violence against women, my mandate jointly with CEDAW committee elaborated the new CEDAW General Recommendation number 35 on gender-based violence against women. And this is now new standard that is really providing clear and good roadmap on all activities that are needed in area of prevention of violence against women, services for victims, prosecution of perpetrators, and coordination between all those activities. The CEDAW committee and my mandate are now planning to elaborate its implementation guide, and you are all invited, all regions, all the regional commissions are invited to contribute to this process. We need to accelerate progress. The mandate has also developed a number of significant reports related to ending violence against women. Let me briefly mention report on online violence against women in politics, violence against women during reproductive health services, including childbirth, and also report on integrated services with focus on shelters and protection orders. And shelters and protection orders are extremely important tools for prevention and protection of women victims of violence. And we need to really encourage countries to proceed in that direction. Let me also mention one long-term initiative of mandate that is identifying collection of data, and especially data on gender-related killings of women. We need to focus on collection of good data in order to have focus on prevention, and I'm calling all states to establish observatories on violence against women and gender-related killings, so femicides of women, and to look at two categories specifically, intimate partner killings and family-related killings. What we are seeing now that in all countries, all over the world, it is clearly coming out that in a context of intimate partner killings, out of 10 persons killed, more than 8 are women. And this is focusing our direction to this type of killings and prevention of such killings and activities that are needed in terms of preventive activities. So I am calling all states to analyze cases. Each case of killing is specific case, specific family situation, specific activities that could be undertaken by police forces, protection measures that should be upholded and so on. So we have to see what are those obstacles, and there are capacities at the national level to collect this type of administrative data and establish such mechanisms. Let me also mention that on this year's International Day on Elimination of Violence Against Women, the platform of all those independent mechanisms jointly issued a statement on a need to ensure that absence of consent is considered as a global standard for definition of rape in criminal laws all over the world. Now we are seeing that majority of penal laws are using provisions that are focusing on use of force. Now we have to change legal definitions there and also stereotypes in order to stop impunity for perpetrators. All around the world we are seeing that perpetrators are enjoying impunity. And let me finalize my statement by mentioning that this review of Beijing Platform for Action adopted 25 years ago is great opportunity for all of us. It's opportunity for you to focus on those areas of concern that are crucial. And it was already mentioned that Executive ESCAP Director and UN Women mentioned violence against women as one of key priorities. I hope that you will also uphold this focus on violence against women as a key priority, that it is going to be reflected in your outcome document. And I'm also calling for inclusion of violence against women as a standing agenda item at each session of the Commissioner Status of Women in New York. We have to have a tool to examine the progress from year to year, and we have to accelerate progress on eliminating violence against women. On video that we have seen at the opening session, one young lady said, "Together we can end violence, stigma, and stereotypes." So let us do it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Simonovic. Distinguished delegates, I currently have the pleasure of inviting Vika Crisilla Larasati, the representative from civil society, to make a statement. Vika, floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Excellencies and distinguished delegates. I speak on behalf of over 300 feminists from 35 countries who attend the Civil Society Forum and the Young Feminist Forum for the 25-year regional review of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. We are the women, young people of diverse identities, ages, sexual orientations, gender identities, expression, and sex characteristics. We are discriminated by caste, class, ethnicity. We are from Dalit, indigenous, tribal, minority communities. We belong to diverse faiths and religions. We are workers in different realities. Women affected by conflict, including stateless and displaced women. We are women with disabilities, single women, and women living with HIV. We are angry. 25 years since Beijing, we are far from reaching gender equality. Inequalities of wealth, power, and resources are greater than ever before. We face everyday misogyny and violence within our homes, at work, and in public spaces. We are alarmed at pushback on the woman, peace, and security agenda, and at the regression on sexual and reproductive health and rights. We are disturbed by rising religious fundamentalism, nationalisms, increased surveillance and targeting of women human rights defenders. Our region, the largest and the most diverse in the world, is reeling from the impact of climate crisis. Neoliberal regimes have robbed us of food sovereignty. Privatization has denied us access to education and health. Today, we present our vision of developed justice and peace. Today, we come to you with hope that you will act. 25 years on, is it time for system change? Time to address structural and systemic barriers, to recognize the failure of neoliberal economic policies and damage to women's lives and livelihoods, to invest resources for women's rights instead of militarization and nuclearization, meet commitments of Security Council Resolution 1325 and subsequent resolution, strengthen gender architecture and accountability at all levels, to involve us as equal partner in agenda setting and decision making, to uphold sexual and reproductive health and rights, including access to safe abortion. Therefore, we strongly urge member states to, 1, ensure primacy of human rights in trade agreement and remove the investor-state dispute settlement mechanism. 2, conduct human rights and gender impact assessment of trade agreements and the digital economy, technology, and innovation. 3, support the process for a legally binding treaty on transnational corporation and other business enterprise. 4, advocate for global architecture to address tax evasion, avoidance, and illicit financial flows. 5, ensure social protection, wage security, freedom from violence and harassment, and freedom of association of all workers in the formal and informal economy. Ensure universal health care for all, including in humanitarian setting. 6, recognize, reduce, and redistribute women's unpaid work through state investment in universal social protection, public services, and gender-responsive infrastructure. 7. Ensure food sovereignty and promote and protect women's ownership, access, use, and control of land, water, seed, commons, and traditional and indigenous knowledge system. 8. Decriminalize abortion and sex work. Review policies and laws that conflate sex worker and human trafficking, since they are not the same. 9. End discriminatory laws and practices that perpetuate violence, legitimate child marriage, criminalize consent in relation to sexual autonomy, reform laws enabling inequality in inheritance, citizenship, nationality, marriage, and its dissolution. 10. Enforce age-appropriate, accessible, evidence, and right-based comprehensive sexuality education for all, both in and out of school. 11. Review and strengthen national frameworks on gender and disability inclusion. 12. Produce and disseminate high-quality, reliable data disaggregate by sex and gender and by differential axis of marginalization, reflecting multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. Last, recognize the climate emergency is real. The government of the region should drive discussion on climate crisis and uphold the principle of common but differentiate responsibility. We need a just and equitable transition away from extractive profit and fossil fuel-based economy. To closing this, we, the women and young people of Asia and the Pacific, urge you to take a bold steps in translating Beijing commitments and our recommendation into action that will transform our lives. We trust that you will not let us down. Thank you.
Thank you, Vika. Obviously inspired many. Distinguished delegates, it is time to conduct the election of officers of the meeting, and it is my pleasure to invite the Executive Secretary of ESCAP to do this. Madam Executive Secretary, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to conduct the election of officers for the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on the Beijing+25 review. I now invite nominations for the chair and vice chair of the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on the Beijing+25 review, as well as for the chair and vice chair of the closed working group on the draft outcome document. I recognize the distinguished representative of Japan.
The delegation of Japan has the honor to nominate the following bureau for the conference and the closed working group. For chair of the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on the Beijing+25 review, Honorable Merisei Vuniwanga, Minister, Ministry for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, Fiji. For the vice chairs of the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on the Beijing+25 review, the delegation of Japan is proposing that, in accordance with the practice of the ESCAP Commission sessions, all ministerial level heads of delegation in attendance be elected as vice chairs. For chair of the closed working group on the draft outcome document, the delegation of Japan would like to propose Her Excellency Rodra Bukoy, Chairperson, Philippine Commission on Women. For Vice Chair, Ms. Fatima Yumna, Deputy Minister, Ministry of Gender, Family and Social Services, Maldives. We assure that under the able leadership of this distinguished Bureau, all the tasks assigned to us will be achieved successfully.
Thank you, the distinguished representative of Japan, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. The distinguished representative of Japan has nominated for chair of the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on the Beijing+25 review, Her Excellency Meresaini Vuniwaqa, Minister for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, Fiji, for the vice chairs. It has been proposed with the consent of the participants that in accordance with the practice at ESCAP Commission sessions, all ministerial level heads of delegation in attendance be elected as vice chairs. In addition, the distinguished representative of Japan has nominated for chair of the close working group on the draft outcome document, Her Excellency Ms. Rodora M. Bukoy, Chairperson, Philippine Commission on Women, and for Vice Chair, Ms. Fatima Yumna, Deputy Minister, Ministry of Gender, Family and Social Services, Maldives. Are there any other nominations? I see none. Would any delegation wish to second the nominations made by the distinguished representative of Japan? I recognize the distinguished representative of Nauru.
The delegation of Nauru would like to second the nomination made by the delegation of Japan. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished representative of Nauru. Would any other delegation wish to take the floor?
The delegation of Bangladesh would like to second the nomination made by the delegation of Japan.
Okay, thank you very much, distinguished representative of Bangladesh. I recognize the distinguished representative of Malaysia.
Yes, the delegation of Malaysia would like to second the nomination made by the delegation of Japan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, distinguished representative of Malaysia. Again, would any other delegation wish to take the floor? So as I see none, it is my great pleasure to declare Her Excellency Meresaini Vuniwaqa, Ministry for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, Fiji, as the chair of the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on the Beijing+25 review. For the vice chairs, again, following the practice of commission sessions, all ministerial level and vice ministerial level heads of delegation in attendance are elected as vice chair. It is also my great pleasure to declare Her Excellency Ms. Rodora M. Bukoy, Chairperson, Philippine Commission on Women, as chair of the close working group on the draft outcome document, and Her Excellency Ms. Siddhartha Sharif, Ministry of Gender, Family and Social Services, Maldives, as Vice Chair of the close working group on the draft outcome document. Let us congratulate the Bureau by acclamation.
Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary. We are actually very cognizant of time, but may we invite the Honourable Minister, Meresaini Vuniwaqa, to take her seat as chair at the rostrum and conduct the adoption of the agenda.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Bureau members, I wish to express a warm appreciation to all distinguished delegates for the confidence reposed in us. It is my privilege to serve as your chair for this important Asia-Pacific Ministerial Forum on the Beijing+25 review. I hereby call the conference to order. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls lies at the heart of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. As the Executive Secretary aptly stated in her opening statement, almost 25 years on from Beijing, there is an urgent need to respond to the call for change to make gender equality a reality. This ministerial conference provides a timely platform to identify key priorities and actions for Asia and the Pacific to respond to this call. The Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on the Beijing+25 review thus presents us the opportunity to review existing gaps and progress in the region. In the coming days, we will therefore analyze common social development needs and trends, challenges faced by women and girls, and share country experiences of developing effective policies, programs, and otherwise good practices in this regard. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I seek your cooperation in steering this conference to a successful conclusion and ensuring that we achieve the results that are expected of us within the short time at our disposal. Together, and with the able support of colleagues in the Bureau and the Secretariat, we may look forward to rigorous discussions and achievement of the expected outcomes of this conference. We shall now take up agenda item 1C, adoption of the agenda as presented to you in document ESCAP/MC/2019/L.1. Are there any comments on the provisional agenda, which has been circulated well in advance by the Secretariat? As there are no comments on the agenda before you, the provisional agenda is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to invite all heads of delegations, that is one representative per delegation, to join in a group photo here on stage. ESCAP staff will accompany ministerial level delegates to their positions. Other heads of delegations, please make your way swiftly to the stage. During the break, we invite you all to view exhibitions on levels 1 and 2 of the conference center, co-created by ESCAP and UN Women, as well as an exhibition by the government of China entitled Women, Half of the Sky, including an opening ceremony. Kindly return to this meeting room at 10:15 a.m., please. And thank you.
Until a few months ago, because we established this advisory.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates,